Nigeria's federal government plans to introduce a new rule requiring electricity distribution companies to meet minimum capital requirements before renewing their licenses. Power Minister Adebayo Adelabu announced this at the Nigeria Energy Week 2025 in Lagos, explaining that the policy aims to strengthen DisCos financially and improve service delivery. He revealed 700 billion naira has been secured to install 1.1 million meters under the Presidential Metering Initiative, while power generation has risen to 5,300 megawatts. Adelabu highlighted key reforms, including 4 trillion naira in bonds to clear power sector debt, targeted subsidies for low-income households, and private sector-driven investments to unlock stranded generation capacity. Joining us now is lead consultant on power to the Nigerian Governors Forum, Odion Omofoman. It's a pleasure to have you join me in the studio.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. And we know it has been, I think today is the final day of Nigeria Energy Week, and we've had the Office of the Minister of Power make some bold announcements and declarations. One of them has been the minimum capital requirement for issuing or renewing of licenses for the DisCos. A bit of backdrop, first of all, and how much of a difference you see this making in the industry?
Thank you again. First of all, I think the proposed policy directives for DisCos to increase their capital base or to have a minimum capital base for them is a policy that has been long in the offing and perhaps maybe 10 years past due if I thought it's going to be passed. I say this because DisCos have unfortunately been the weakest link in the value chain as far as I'm concerned, and they don't really have the capital to operate in the business that they do. But that said, I also wonder, because you then understand that a number of the DisCos are now licensees of the state. They're no longer licensees of NERC. For instance, Ikeja Electricity Distribution, Ikeja Electric is now IE Energy,
right,
and it's a licensee of the Lagos State Regulatory Commission, not a licensee of NERC. So the question now, to my mind, which I think the minister needs to clarify, is this license requirement or this capitalization requirement, which DisCos is he referring to? Is it the ones that are still licenses of NERC, or it cuts across all DisCos? So the question would be, does the federal government have the basis now to now say you want to impose minimum capital requirements, which I think it's a good idea and long past due. The other thing is that if you're imposing minimum capital requirements on DisCos, then you must ensure that investors that put in their money are able to recover their money. So this whole idea of subsidies or freezing tariffs and then trying to recover tariffs from Band A will not. You will need to make sure that capital, there's return on equity on that capital that they put there. So those are the kind of conversations I think we ought to be having. It's a great idea. Like I said, it's 10 years past due. But now that you want to implement it, things have changed. And we need to, particularly the state regulators, need to now understand how does this policy affect their markets.
It sounds to me like you're saying things are not being done in an orderly manner, and that will affect implementation. Is that what you're saying? Are we putting a cart before the horse? What's happening here?
Well, I think the horse has since bolted from the barn
a
long time ago. But the point is that there's a new regime. Electricity distribution now falls under the purview of states. So if you want to impose capital requirements as a license renewal condition, who's renewing the licenses of these entities? These are now state licenses, not NERC. So maybe the minister needs to provide clarification. But these are simple things that can be addressed through a conversation with the state regulators. But unfortunately, we see the federal government take decisions without any form of consultation whatsoever, and it comes out as poorly implemented.
And that harmony between the federal and the states, it appears we're not seeing that, even with the Electricity Act, and I think we have about 10 states who have gone on.
More than 10. More
than 10, right, to create their own electricity market. Let's come to the issue of harmonization, so that everything, how well is this, administration doing in that regard, especially considering where we want to see that sector go? We've seen a lot of reforms, but the outcomes, are they matching up?
It's a slow process, and rightly so. This will take time. There will be back and forth conversations. There are kinks that conversations will address. Honest, frank, and collaborative conversations will address. And one of the things I would implore the minister is to set up that framework for that collaboration to start. I mean, he's mentioned electricity subsidies. I'm not aware that there's been any conversations with states to say, okay, how do we implement electricity subsidies at state electricity market levels, you know? So the minister needs to create that collaborative framework where policies of the federal government, which are great policies, by the way, are in alignment with also states' focus and the new paradigm in the market. Otherwise, we're going to have a situation whereby it seems both the federal government and the states seem to be in conflict. And obviously, it would also mean that the regulators at the federal level and the regulators at state levels are also in conflict. So I think it behaves on the minister to create that collaborative framework. I don't think he's done that yet.
Right. And hopefully we do see that being done. You have said that DisCos are the weakest link. You've called them out on that ground. And now that you're bringing up, I mean, the announcement was subsidy for low-income households. And any investor, stakeholder hearing subsidy would have a lot of questions going on in their minds. Yeah. Are we backtracking a little bit, considering DisCos, its financial issues, it's somewhat tied to a subsidy? So what are your thoughts on another subsidy for low-income households?
Well, first of all, the idea of subsidies, targeted subsidies, is not a bad idea. However, it's the implementation framework. I haven't seen any proposal or proposed implementation framework, for instance. Who's going to fund it? How will it be funded? Who will administer it? And then you then have states who've said, look, we don't want a market where we now have to bear some level of subsidies for the people. People consume energy, whether they are collecting from the grid or they're using alternative power, they pay in full for this. So we'll prefer a situation whereby the market from day one, state electricity markets, people are able to pay for what they consume and not build an unsustainable subsidy program. So I guess I'll wait for, without speaking too much to it, we'll wait for the minister to provide more details. But this is where the minister needs to, and the policy advisors around him, need to sit with the states to say, look, this is what the federal government is thinking. You guys, how do we make this work? It's not for them to sit somewhere in Abuja and then you then make these policies that have no bearing to the states who literally regulate this market.
Mm-hmm. So a call for harmonization.
Yeah.
Let's go to another link in the value chain, hopefully not the second weakest, the GenCos. It'll be interesting to see where they stand in your ranking. The Guardian recently reported it's been a decade of privatization of the GenCos. How would you say that they have fared? What have been the highlights? What are their weaknesses? What are some of their strengths over the past 10 years?
The GenCos have been the success story of privatization. Generation was privatized, distribution was privatized, transmission remains with the federal government. Of the two arms, of the two sections of the value chain privatized, GenCos have performed the best. The co-investors have provided the most investments to revamp the generation capacity. So when privatization happened, I think Nigeria's available generation capacity was less than 3,000, 4,000. After privatizations to date, I think it's close to 12, 13,000 of available capacity. I mean, obviously there's constraints on the grid and gas supply, so you can't dispatch all of this. Having said that, GenCos, in my view, and I said this on Tuesday I was invited as a panelist, GenCos are dinosaurs. And you know what happened to the dinosaur? It became extinct. Right. So GenCos are, based on what we see today, they're dinosaurs and they're extinction events that may trigger the extinction of most of them. First of all, they're reliant on a national grid that has not served them very well. The second is they also are now faced with growing competition from much more smaller, nimbler players, embedded generation guys who are pretty much just putting their embedded generation closer to the customers and bypassing the national grid. And then you now have the rise of renewable energy. I have solar panels in my house. I barely use 4 hours of grid supply. I am mostly either on solar and battery. And you see a lot of companies do that. Besides, most of the industrial companies are now having their own captive power to the extent that the fastest growing, I think Nigeria accounts for the fastest growing gas network, domestic gas network. At least in the Lagos area, you see the Axela pipeline going all the way down to Lekki. These are areas not served by the grid, at least the companies there. The entire Lekki Free Trade Zone is not served by the national grid. That's where you have Dangote Refinery, Dangote Fertilizer, Tolerance, and all the rest. You can imagine the power consumption there, not served by the grid. Equa Atlantic, not served by the grid. So you then start to realize that, yes, 13,000, somebody just said that it was 15,000 installed capacity, megawatts of installed capacity. These people that should consume it are already looking for alternatives, which is they're not reliant on the grid. At some point, you'll find out all the money that the GenCos have invested in revamping and restoring capacity. At some point, they may not be able to manage it. The other thing is that there's a financial constraint. They are owed so much money.
4 trillion.
So, well, I don't know about 4 trillion, but at least a sizable amount of money they are owed. So we're seeing these extinction events happen. And like I said to the GenCos directly, you are in a dinosaur era. You guys are dinosaurs. So, at some point, you need to...
Are you questioning the 4 trillion figure?
I would not speak to that. Let me allow the verification committee to do whatever they need to do. But I will not just parrot 4 trillion. Okay,
interesting. Dinosaurs, GenCos, endangered species. Is there a way to preserve them?
Yes.
Okay.
So now GenCos need to take ownership of the value chain or take more interest in the value chain. The current model where they sell power to Embed and then hope for Embed to sell the power to bankrupt DisCos will not serve them anymore. The current model where they have to rely on the national grid to wield their power, where they just rely on available capacity and then they get paid for whatever they put into the grid will not work. So they need to take more ownership. They need to be more proactive in saying, look, how do we make sure our power, the power we generate, get to the last mile consumers, you and I, this institution, companies, industries. How do we make sure? How do we start to bring some investment downstream? In other words, the Electricity Act allows for independent transmission networks. So rather than rely on TCN to wheel your power, why don't you now say, okay, we'll look at how we wheel power to these core industrial areas, so that our power can get there, whether the grid is up or down or collapsed or partially up, whatever engineering term that they put. The other thing is you now have state electricity markets that are coming up. And I can tell you, there are so many unserved areas. So you need the GenCos to say, how do we now start to service state electricity markets outside of these DisCos, outside of the subcos in this area? How do we provide our power to new state licensees who want this power, rather than them go and then build their own power plants that are closest to the people? So GenCos need to now start to get far more proactive. Otherwise, like I said, they're dinosaurs and the extinction events are happening at some point.
Hopefully enough is done to conserve them. But thank you so much for your time.
But you missed one more. NERC is 20 years today.
Oh.
Yes. So
what a coincidence. Perhaps we know that conversation will take longer than another 5 minutes, and we don't have that time. NERC, they're going through their own shifts as well, especially with the decentralization. But some other time, hopefully, we'll have you on to discuss.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time. Lead consultant to the Nigerian Governors Forum on Power, Mr. Odion Omofoman. Thank you.